We've got about 20 minutes for questions, and I've gotten some in text form. There's a couple, though, that I'm going to be a little bit selfish with and just kind of lead with. One of the things that really struck me in reading the book and listening to your presentation is this idea of nuns changing over time. You kind of mentioned that toward the end of your presentation here. And you gave us some anecdotes about your the brown bag.
Yeah.
I think that's what you called it.
Yeah, Brown Bag Friday.
Yeah, and which I think is fantastic. Is there any indication as to any research as to why these folks stop being nuns and join that 15% who move toward Christianity?
So, to point you towards the Great De-Churching book, the number one reason why people de-church, you want to guess what it is? This is probably the most shocking statistic of the entire book. The number one reason why people de-church is because they moved. Not because they have, I think the problem here is, you know what's a sexy story? I left the church because I don't like their politics. Or I don't like their theology on this. Or I was abused. Or I was neglected. Or I was whatever you want to call it. You know what's a boring story? I left because I just moved and I never found another church. That's where most people leave church, is just through they go from being weekly to being monthly to being yearly to being never, right? It's a slow slide away from religion. It's not these evangelicals love epiphanies, don't we, guys? I was lost and now I'm found. Guess what? It doesn't work like that most often. It's usually a slow, gradual shift back and forth. And so I think there's this theory, this idea in behavioral economics called a nudge, the power of a nudge, okay? And I'll give you an example. Should your 401k be opt-in or opt-out when you get a new job? If you make it opt-out, the share of Americans who save money for their retirement goes up dramatically because it's on by default, not off by default. The number one reason why people show up to the polls on Sunday or on election day is because they were asked to vote. That literally is the secret to getting people to turn out, is being asked to vote. You know why people come to church who typically don't come to church? Because they were asked to come by someone they trust. That is literally, I wish it was way more complicated than that, but just ask someone to come. Now, okay, but here's the other thing that you need to be aware of. If you say, do you want to come to a church service with me on a Sunday morning? They're more likely to say no. But how about this? How about if your church thinks a lot more carefully about other ways that people can get inside your doors that are not necessarily in the worship service? Okay? I talk a lot. The problem with, not to talk about you, Brian, but
yeah, it's okay.
The problem with divinity schools is I think everything's vertical, right? Everything's a God problem, right? I'm a social scientist, so you know what I think? Everything's a people problem, which is probably wrong. Somewhere between the two of us, we're probably right. But I think churches, the problem is that pastors go, well, we should have a revival. That's what's going to, make our church grow. How about have a picnic or a potluck or a carnival or a back-to-school bash where there's no contact cards, no praise and worship music, no service happening, no evangelism happening. Give people opportunities to come and just hang out. What you realize when you look at the data is the most important part of a Sunday morning from a social science perspective is the 15 minutes before and the 15 minutes after the worship service. That's where people make connections and really build community. And I think church is a community, right? It's this. Give people more horizontal reasons to come. And you know what? If you invited nothing in particular, remember how they're doing economically not well, right? Imagine you say, hey, come to this thing, free food, A. B, we'll have a backpack full of supplies for your kids when they go back to school. What an idea, right? If they were on the fence about going, they hear free food and free backpack full of stuff, they're going to say yes. Make them come for the wrong reasons. Give them a whole bunch of wrong reasons to come. Make their lives easier, and then they will eventually stay for the right reasons because they'll realize you guys are not a cult. You're not a bunch of weirdos. You're just trying to live your life as best you can together, and by being together, their lives will be better too. So I think it's partly the individual's responsibility to ask people to go, but it's also the church's responsibility to give people multiple points of entry to get on the grounds of and think about what churches have. Big kitchens, big fellowship halls, big, yards to play games in and stuff. Use that stuff all the time as ways to get people on your property and not being afraid of who you are, right, as a church. And I think they'll realize that you're not weird, you're just people, and that will make them more likely to come on a Sunday morning.
So one of the things that struck me when I first encountered your work, the nuns, and it's required reading. I told you this, required reading for my grad students, because I think it represents the kind of book that we pastors can read to stay abreast of relevant issues like this, and it's accessible. But in the first 1 or 2 pages, you totally offended me.
Good. No, did I?
You said pastors, something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah,
something to the effect of pastors are looking at the social science data and jumping to all kinds of conclusions,
Yes.
and they just need to stay in their lane.
Yes.
And I was like, wait a second, who do you think you are? But then I started reading, and I realized, oh my goodness, everything that I believed about this category of nuns was wrong, completely wrong.
Yeah.
And one of the statistics that I think that is most striking is the poverty level.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you are sharing with us just hard data from what your surveys and data analysis are showing you. Are you finding any correlations between the poverty, education? What about that makes them not be interested in church stuff?
So I wrote this post on my Substack that went viral, and everyone still talks about it. The title is called "Religion as a Luxury Good," as a good, as in something. The people that are most likely to be in your church on Sunday morning are people with a 4-year college degree making between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. That is the most likely group to go to church. And I know the conception that everyone has is oh, evangelicals are a bunch of hillbillies who snake handle and believe in miracles. That is not what the data says. The data says it's polite upper middle class folks are the ones going to church every Sunday. If you follow the golden path, which is college degree, good income, married with children, you are much more likely to be in church than if you do anything that makes you fall off the golden path, right? No college degree, low income, not married, single mother, divorced, all those kind of things. I think what you've got to understand is there's this growing divide in society where you have the haves and the have-nots. And it's not just about how much money you have in your bank account. It's about how many friends you have, right? It's about how many social organizations you're a part of. And I think what a lot of people forget is that a lot of people in America go to church for these reasons, not these reasons. You get what I'm saying here? They go because they understand the value of the social connection. And I think what happens is when you drop out of one part of society, you feel like everything's against you, right? So if I'm not doing well economically, I feel like I can't trust anyone. Institutions are out to get me. The church is out to get me. No one's listening to me. And it becomes this spiral of despair. And I think that churches are part of that spiral, right? They're seen as these suspect institutions where it's well, I got divorced, or I had a kid out of wedlock, or I didn't have a college degree, and therefore I don't fit in. And I think the problem is, I don't think churches are doing this on purpose, right? They're never oh, if you don't have a college degree, you don't belong here. But the people who have higher levels of education have higher interpersonal trust, right? They trust other people. You've got to find ways to get over that divide and tell them that people can be trusted, not be suspect and cynical about everything. And I think people at the lower end of the economic spectrum want to think that they are powerless to get themselves out of that situation. I'll tell you one story, then I'll be done. So I went to, when I was in college at Greenville, we went to St. Paul's Free Methodist Church, which is run by the faculty, the religion faculty. They actually have students preach there once a month as a way, an internship thing to get them involved in ministry. It's a very liturgical church, okay? They do this thing called prayers of the people, where it's the pastor comes up and reads a short written prayer, and then he opens it up to the congregation, and then you'll have someone say, oh, my Aunt Susan has cancer, could you all pray for her? And the pastor says, Lord, in your mercy, and we all say, hear our prayer. And it usually goes on for a minute or two. You get 6 or 7 little prayers about, my kids are going back to school, or whatever it is. I was at one of these services one time. Guy comes in late with his girlfriend or wife. They have a little baby. Looks younger than me, and I was 21 at the time. At the very end of prayers of the people, he chimes in from the back and goes, could you all pray for me? I lost my job, and I don't know how I'm going to afford rent this month. Pastor says, Lord, in your mercy. We all say, hear our prayer. Go on to the next part of the service. After church was over, one of the businessmen in town went directly over to that young man and said, young man, if you want to come work at my lumber yard, you can have a job tomorrow. I think people don't realize that God works in mysterious ways, and that if you speak a need into people who want to help, they will help you. What a crazy idea. That part of church is not being talked about enough. This part, now, can God give you money? Yes. But can God help you get a job by you saying, I need to get a job? Yes. Let's talk about that a little bit more. And I think that might be the nudge that people need to make them understand that people can be trusted and they can be helped by people in the church.
So it's a little bit of perception on the side of the nun. I don't fit in there.
Yes.
But it's also a little bit of our culture where somehow maybe churches are communicating, yes, you're correct, you don't necessarily fit in.
Yeah.
And
Subtly.
our job is to correct that.
Exactly right. I think talk about things like addiction. Talk about addiction from the pulpit, would you please? Because it's affecting people in your community rampantly. Talk about depression. Talk about social isolation. Those are all things that matter to the kingdom of God. It's not, we talk about the sins that are easy to kind of put out there. Let's talk about the sins that affect people sitting in the pews every Sunday. Because you know what? If you're a pastor and you suffer with mental illness, you should talk about it from the pulpit. Because you know what you're saying? I'm just like you. I'm just like you. If I've suffered from addiction, you should say that. I've suffered from just like you. You know what I mean? Don't act like you're above. Act like you're with. And I think that is what makes people who are on the fringes go, hey, that person, I can relate to that person because they're like me.
So I fit.
I fit in.
In a church this size, and they have chairs, no tables on Sunday mornings, there's probably, conservatively speaking, 3 or 4 rows of nuns.
Absolutely.
Every Sunday.
Absolutely.
That was something that struck me as a surprise when I read your book and heard your presentation.
So amongst people who never attend religious services, okay, which is a growing number of Americans, amongst people who never attend religious services, those people are just as likely to say that God doesn't exist as they are to say, God exists and I have no doubts about it. All right? So we cannot equate belief. 85% of Americans today still believe in a higher power at some level. So the vast majority of Americans, 40% of Americans never attend religious services, attend less than once a year. 30% of Americans are nuns. Only 15% of Americans are atheist agnostic by belief. Belief is the last thing to go when it comes to the nuns. There's still a ton of people out there who never come to your church who believe in God and want to have a relationship with God, just don't trust this to get them there, or don't see the value in this to get them there.
So along those lines, nuns showing up to church, I get several of these questions have to do with kind of the distinction you're making between, atheists, agnostics, and nuns. Mm-hmm. And what I'm getting from these questions is, I think we all understand, the distinction between atheist is somebody who is avowedly no.
Yeah.
What distinction would you make between, beyond what they say they believe, is there any distinction between an agnostic and a nothing in particular?
Yeah, so to me, the way we think about atheist agnostics as almost one category now, because they're very similar. I call agnostics atheists like diet atheists, like 10% less atheists.
Atheist zero.
Like they're 10% less liberal. They're 10% less likely to never go to church. Like they're slightly less than atheists. So what we think of them like this, and this is actually the way we're thinking more about like how these categories are constructed. They're secular people. Atheist agnostics are secular people, okay, which means that they've thrown off religion and they've replaced it with something else, a rationalist, scientist, evolutionary worldview. Okay, that's what they've replaced religion with something else. Nothing in particulars are non-religious in that they have thrown off religion mostly, but have not replaced it with anything else. They are defined by what they're not by what they are. These people are secular. These people are non-religious, and as a person of faith, I find that incredibly troublesome, right? These nothing in particulars. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a podcast called Rabbit Hole, 25-year-old guy. I think he's like the prototypical nothing in particular, right? Dude he went to college for 2 years, got kicked out for drinking, moved back home to a small town in Iowa, is a manager at the Dairy Queen, okay? Which to me is like, that is a nothing in particular job for sure. Like, there's not a whole lot up for being manager. That's a not great job, not a bad job, not a great job, but really he's 25 years old and he's not going to move up from there. They ask him, what do you do all day when you're not working? He goes, I watch YouTube. all day. And here's what's crazy about him. He goes, at the start, when I started watching YouTube, the algorithm pulled me in one direction towards this guy named Stefan Molyneux, who's a racist, xenophobe, anti-woman, really far right, like crazy fringe guy, who actually got kicked off YouTube, by the way. So he was one of his disciples at one point. A year later, the same guy was a Bernie Sanders socialist. The same guy. Why? Because the algorithm gave him more of what he wanted the other direction, and because he had nothing in his life that gave him structure and meaning. No adult in the room who stepped in and goes, "We don't believe that, sir. We don't think that. That is not allowable." And what I worry about, if you don't have a schema, a schematic, that the scaffolding that tells you, like, okay, this is inbounds and this is out of bounds, you'll be drugged all over the ideological spectrum in both directions in ways that are really caustic to not just, to American democracy, right? To who we are as a country. And those are the people I worry about the most, because they have nothing. They've not replaced religion with anything. They're floating in social, political, economic space,
So you brought up Bernie Sanders,
Yeah.
and you just talked about democracy. Several of these questions have to do with politics, and I don't want to put you on the spot with anything.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask a question, because I just finished reading your book, 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America.
Yeah.
I'm surprised when I read your books, because like I said, what I think is happening is not happening.
Yeah.
Which of the 20 myths surprised you when you were putting that book together?
Okay, I'll give you one that's going to make some people not happy, and then one that'll probably make everyone happy. One is that abortion is the most important issue for white evangelicals on Election Day. It's actually not. I think immigration was as important to the Donald Trump victory in 2016 as abortion was. If you ask evangelicals themselves, is abortion a deal breaker for what candidate I vote for? Only 25% say you have to share my view on abortion for me to vote for you. They tell you that it's not a deal breaker, but the media makes it into this big deal, like it's got to be abortion. It's not, okay? So that's one. I think immigration is actually becoming more important over time, especially amongst lower education, lower income white evangelicals. The one that I think that most people have a misconception about, though, is that pastors talk about politics from the pulpit. I've been in church my entire life, guys. I can name on one hand the number of sermons I've ever heard that were expressly or even implicitly political in any way. We ask weekly church-going people over the last 12 months, have you heard any of the following issues talked about from the pulpit? And there were 10 issues we listed. Everything from immigration to abortion to healthcare to gay marriage to all these kind of things. You know what the most common response option was? None of the above. 33% of our sample said they'd heard none of those issues spoken about in the prior 12 months, and 52% of the sample picked one issue or zero out of those 10 in the last 12 months. Most pastors do not talk about politics from the pulpit. But for whatever reason, people who are like on the far left go, well, white evangelicals are more political because they go to church every Sunday. I go, have you gone to a non-denominational church at any point? You know what pastors do in those churches more often than not? Talk about how to be a better father, a better parent, a better friend, build the kingdom. They don't talk about politics because they want to grow, and a great way to not grow is talk about politics. Yeah. Like, it's just so antithetic. Tell me you've never been to church without telling me you've ever been to church. And one thing is, pastors are political. Now some of them are.
The fringe.
The fringe are, like the Greg Locks of the world.
What is that guy?
Yeah, he thinks that autism's from the devil. That's what he said at one point. It's demonic possession. That guy has made an entire following. You know how many people come to his church every Sunday? Less than 1,000. He has 2.2 million people following on social media, but less than 1,000 come in person. You guys see what's happening right now? Dude's built a persona based on politics. He is not the median pastor. The median pastor will jump out of his way to miss the political stuff rolling downhill at him because he does not want to get involved with that. So.
Thanks. We need to wrap it up here, but let's thank Ryan one more time. Are you going to stick around for lunch with us? He's going to stick around and eat with us.
I'm a Baptist, okay? Food. I love that. Come on.
Baptists and food. I'm going to ask Matt Farrar, one of the pastors here at Christ Church, to come up and talk and then pray us out, okay?
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you. For being here. You going to sit up here with me?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Awesome. Cool. Copy of the book?
They could take these copies, disperse them evenly.
Cool.
And secondly, don't go down.
You want this?
No.
All right.
They can go, if they ask, we can go through the preschool upstairs. We can't go downstairs because of school.
Oh, for new construction stuff? Cool. Wait, Ryan, when I was out there listening to you a few minutes ago, the first thing that came to my mind was, first, this is very overwhelming for me. I grew up in church my entire life, like you.
Yeah.
And the first thing that popped in my mind was Matthew 16. And the reason that's the case is because if you know that scene, here's the scene. Jesus is with the disciples, and he asks them this question, "Who do you say I am?" And they respond back. Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and then Peter. He says, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus says back to him, Peter, on that statement, I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. This is a lot of information about how we reach people who are lost, people who are on the fringe. But I guess my reminder for all of us is that he's using all of you to do that. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep faithfully preaching the Word of God. Make sure we are inviting people into relationship with each other and pointing them to Jesus Christ, because that's how we make an impact. That's how we make a difference.
Amen.
And so thank you for being here, Ryan.
Absolutely. Been a pleasure.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.